Let me introduce myself. My name is Eleanor Thompson. I'm 68 years old with completely white hair that I used to dye until I realized it didn't matter anymore, and blue eyes that Frank, my late husband, used to say were pieces of summer sky. I never imagined I'd be sharing this story, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns that even I couldn't have predicted. The smile on my daughter Jennifer's face disappeared in that instant. It was as if someone had turned off a light. Richard's words, my son-in-law, still echoed in the dining room, heavy as lead and sharp as razors. I never thought that after 4 decades of caring for others, I would find myself completely alone, with just 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Frank and I were happy, you know? An ordinary couple with an ordinary life, a lovely daughter, and plans for a peaceful retirement. We had built our life carefully, saving what we could, creating a home filled with love rather than expensive things. Frank worked as an accountant, and I taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school for 35 years. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Frank died 6 months ago. A massive heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Sunday afternoon. Our neighbors found him collapsed beside the still-running mower. When I returned from the grocery store, there was an ambulance parked in front of our house. The rest you can imagine. I don't like to relive that day. Our house held 42 years of memories. The place where Jennifer took her first steps, where we celebrated birthdays, Christmases, graduations. Every corner held Frank's presence, from the pencil marks on the kitchen wall where we measured Jennifer's height as a child to the swing he built in the backyard. It was as if he was still there, and it was destroying me. I can't stay here anymore. It's too painful, I confessed to Jennifer during one of our Sunday lunches, the first without Frank. She held my hand across the table, her eyes full of concern. Sell the house, Mom. Come live with us for a while, until you find a new place. Jennifer and Richard's apartment wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms in a middle-class building in a reasonable area of the city. But it was a temporary safe harbor, I thought. The house sale was quicker than I expected. The real estate market was hot, and a young couple made an offer on the first day of viewings. I remember the look in the woman's eyes when she saw the swing in the backyard. They lit up exactly like Jennifer's when Frank installed it. 2 days after signing the papers, I arrived at Jennifer's apartment with 2 suitcases and a box of memories. Richard opened the door with that forced smile that never reached his eyes. "Welcome to our humble home, Eleanor," he said, making sure to emphasize humble as if it were an advance apology. "Jennifer is just finishing up the guest room." From the beginning, I noticed the discomfort. The small gestures, the glances exchanged between them when they thought I wasn't looking. Richard worked as a middle manager at an insurance company and always came home stressed. Jennifer was an elementary school teacher and tried to balance her husband's tension with nervous smiles. The first few weeks were an exercise in pretending. I pretended not to notice the silence that fell when I entered the room. They pretended everything was fine when Richard complained about the increase in the water or electric bill. I pretended not to hear when Richard mumbled to Jennifer late at night with their bedroom door barely closed. "How long does she plan to stay? It's been 3 weeks already." I tried to be useful. I cooked while they were out, cleaned the apartment, did shopping with my own money. My teacher's pension wasn't much, but I had some savings, and the money from selling the house was in the bank, waiting for me to decide what to do. One night, a month after my arrival, Richard came home particularly irritated. His boss had promoted another employee instead of him. The dinner I prepared, the beef stew that used to be Jennifer's favorite, grew cold on the table while he had his second glass of whiskey. "Do you know how much it costs to maintain a household these days, Eleanor?" he asked, swirling the ice in his glass. His voice had that tone I already knew, falsely casual but full of venom. "Richard, please," Jennifer intervened, her gaze pleading. "No, Jennifer, your mother is a grown woman. She must understand household economics." He turned to me. "Prices go up. Rent increased. The energy bill has tripled since you arrived. And how much do you contribute to the expenses?" I felt my face burn. "I've been buying groceries and a few packages of pasta and cans of tomato sauce," he interrupted with a dry laugh. "That doesn't even cover the extra toilet paper we use." "Richard, enough!" Jennifer slapped the table, tears in her eyes. "She's my mother, and I'm your husband," he shouted, rising so abruptly that the chair fell backward. This house isn't a nursing home. I'm not going to support an extra mouth each month just because you feel sorry for her." At that moment, I looked at my daughter. Her eyes lowered to her plate, avoiding mine. That's when I knew I was truly alone. "How much longer, Eleanor?" Richard continued, calmer now, his tone almost reasonable, which made it all the more cruel. "You have the money from selling the house. Why don't you look for your own place? Have you thought that maybe Jennifer and I want our privacy back?" In the days that followed, the silence was deafening. Jennifer barely looked at me, torn between loyalty to her husband and love for her mother. Richard had planted his seed. The guest room, once a refuge, now seemed borrowed, too temporary. I started looking for apartments to rent. Small ones, just one bedroom, something my pension could cover while I decided what to do with the money from selling the house. Each property I visited seemed more depressing than the last. Small, impersonal cubicles without personality or history. The final blow came on a Thursday. I returned from another frustrating search for a place to live and found my suitcases in the hallway of the apartment. The door was locked. My heart felt like it would explode in my chest as I repeatedly rang the doorbell. Jennifer answered, red eyes, her entire body trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered, barely able to look at me. "Richard says we need the room for an office. He said you've had enough time." "Jenny, my love, please," I begged, using her childhood nickname. "Just a few more weeks. I'm looking for a place, I swear." That's when I heard Richard's voice from inside. "Either you handle this now, Jennifer, or I will." I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes. A fear I instantly recognized because I had seen it in other women. A fear that made my stomach turn. I stood there stunned as Jennifer handed me the small box of personal items that hadn't fit in my suitcases. Her hands were shaking. Behind her, Richard's shadow loomed in the hallway, arms crossed, watching our exchange like a prison guard. "I called you a taxi," Jennifer whispered, pressing a small envelope into my palm. "There's some cash. I'm sorry it's not more." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at her, to remind her of all the nights I'd stayed up with her when she had fevers as a child, all the school plays I'd attended, all the tears I'd wiped away after her first heartbreak. Instead, I felt something inside me crumble like dry sand. "It's okay," I heard myself say, though it wasn't okay at all. "I understand." Richard's voice called out from inside the apartment. "The taxi's meter is running, Eleanor. You wouldn't want to waste more money, would you?" I took one last look at my daughter, memorizing her face. Would this be the last time I saw her? The thought stabbed through me like an icicle. "I love you, Jenny," I said, using the name I'd called her since she was small. "That will never change." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't say it back. The door closed before I could say anything else. The taxi driver was kind enough not to comment on my tears as he loaded my suitcases into the trunk. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. I hadn't thought that far ahead. In my mind, I'd still believed Jennifer would stand up to Richard, that this was just a terrible misunderstanding. "The Parkview Hotel," I said, naming the first place that came to mind. The Parkview wasn't what it once had been. The lobby carpet was worn thin in places, and the paint was peeling around the elevator doors. But it was clean, and the weekly rate was something I could manage while I figured out my next steps. My room was small, just a bed, a dresser, a tiny bathroom, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope Jennifer had given me. $300. Not even enough for 2 weeks at this budget hotel. That first night was the loneliest of my life. I kept my cell phone clutched in my hand, hoping Jennifer would call, would tell me it had all been a mistake, that she'd stood up to Richard and I could come back. The phone remained silent. When sleep finally came, I dreamed of Frank. We were sitting on our porch swing, his arm around my shoulders like it used to be on summer evenings. "You're stronger than you know, Ellie," he said in the dream. "You always have been." I woke up with tears on my pillow and his words echoing in my mind. The days blurred together. I applied for part-time jobs, anything to supplement my modest teacher's pension, but the responses were always the same. "We're looking for someone with more recent experience. We need someone who can commit to a long-term position." Or worst of all, no response at all. I tried calling Jennifer multiple times. Most calls went straight to voicemail. Twice she answered, her voice hurried and whispered, as if she was hiding in a closet to talk to me. "I can't talk now, Mom. Richard's in the other room. Things are complicated right now. I'll call you when I can." She never called back. By the third week, I had moved to an even cheaper motel. My savings were dwindling fast, and I hadn't touched the money from the house sale yet. That was my safety net, the only thing standing between me and complete destitution. I needed to make it last. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I'd never felt so useless, so discarded. Each morning, I had to force myself to get out of bed, to shower, to keep looking for a way forward. Some days, I didn't succeed. It was during one of these low moments, sitting on the floor of my motel room, surrounded by unanswered job applications, that I remembered the box of my mother's belongings I'd brought with me. I hadn't opened it since Frank died. It had seemed too painful, too much like revisiting another loss. The box was nothing special, just an old shoebox with Mom written on the top in my handwriting. Inside were a few photographs, her favorite brooch, the recipe cards written in her neat penmanship, and a small leather-bound book I'd always assumed was a journal, but had never read out of respect for her privacy. As I lifted the journal, my hands trembling slightly, I accidentally dropped the box. It hit the floor at an odd angle, and to my surprise, the bottom panel popped loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a yellowed envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting, with the words, "To be opened after my passing," written across the front. My heart pounding, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a business card for a law firm I didn't recognize. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began in my mother's familiar script. "If you're reading this, I am gone, and it's time you knew the truth about your father." I had to stop reading several times, my vision blurred by tears and shock. The man I'd called father all my life, the quiet, stern factory worker who died when I was in college, wasn't my biological father at all. My real father, according to my mother's confession, was Edward Blackwell, a wealthy businessman she'd worked for briefly as a secretary in the early 1950s. Their affair had been brief but passionate, and when she discovered she was pregnant, she'd confessed to her boyfriend, the man I knew as my father, who had forgiven her and married her anyway, agreeing to raise me as his own. "Edward never knew about you," my mother wrote, "but he remained generous to me in secret over the years, sending money at Christmas that your father believed was a bonus from my job. When Edward died 10 years ago, his attorney contacted me. Though Edward never knew of your existence, he had always held a special place in his heart for me and had left provisions in his will." The final paragraph made my hands shake so badly I could hardly read it. "There is a trust fund, Eleanor, a substantial one set up in my name but transferable to you upon my death. I never touched it, never felt it was truly mine to use, but it's yours now. The attorney's information is enclosed. This is your birthright, though it comes with the painful truth of your origins. I hope you can forgive me for keeping this secret all these years. I only wanted to protect you and the man who loved you as his own. With all my love, always, Mother." The business card was for Hamilton and Associates, a law firm in Boston. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number, not expecting anyone to answer an outdated contact from a dead woman's hidden letter. To my shock, the firm still existed. After explaining who I was and mentioning my mother's name, I was quickly transferred to a senior partner who seemed to know exactly who I was. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice formal but warm, "we've been expecting your call for quite some time. Your mother indicated you might reach out after her passing. If you could come to our offices at your earliest convenience, there are some matters we need to discuss in person." 2 days later, dressed in the best clothes I still owned, I sat in the elegant conference room of Hamilton and Associates, listening in stunned silence as Mr. Hamilton himself explained the extent of my inheritance. "Edward Blackwell's original bequest to your mother was substantial," he explained, sliding a folder toward me. "But per her instructions, it was invested rather than distributed. Over the past 25 years, those investments have performed quite well." I opened the folder and saw a number that made my vision swim. $10 million. Property holdings, stock portfolios, all of it now legally mine. "This can't be real," I whispered. Mr. Hamilton smiled kindly. "I assure you, Mrs. Thompson, it's quite real, and long overdue." As I left the law office, clutching the folder containing details of my new wealth, I felt oddly numb. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 months ago, I'd been called a burden, an extra mouth to feed. Now I had more money than I could spend in what remained of my lifetime. Standing on the busy Boston sidewalk, I realized I had no one to share this news with, no one to celebrate with, no one who cared. That's when I decided, this money wouldn't just change my life, it would transform it completely. The first thing I did was check into a proper hotel. Not extravagant. I wasn't ready for that kind of attention, but clean, comfortable, and secure. I needed space to think, to plan. For the first time in months, I slept without fear of what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, I hired a financial advisor recommended by Mr. Hamilton. Carol Winters was a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who didn't blink an eye when I told her what I wanted to do. "You want to purchase an apartment building? As an investment?" she asked, making notes on her tablet. "A specific apartment building," I clarified. "The one my daughter and son-in-law live in." Carol looked up, her pen pausing. "I see. And may I ask why that particular building?" I considered lying, creating some story about sentimental value or investment potential. Instead, I told her the truth, about Richard's cruelty, about being thrown out, about Jennifer's silent complicity. When I finished, Carol set down her pen. "Mrs. Thompson, I typically don't comment on my clients' personal motivations. My job is to help you manage your assets effectively. But," she leaned forward slightly, "speaking as someone who's seen plenty of bullies in my time, I think this Richard character could use a lesson in karma." We worked quickly after that. Carol created a shell company to make the purchase, ensuring my name wouldn't appear on any documents. She engaged a property management firm that would handle the day-to-day operations once we acquired the building. Everything was done with absolute discretion and professionalism. It took 3 weeks to close the deal. The current owner, a property investment company that had held the building for decades, was eager to sell to an all-cash buyer. They didn't ask questions about the newly formed LLC that made the offer. The day I received confirmation that the building was mine, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, but also sadness. Had it really come to this? Using my unexpected fortune to teach my own family a lesson? "The paperwork is complete, Mrs. Thompson," Carol informed me over the phone. "What would you like to do about rent adjustments?" I had thought about this carefully. Maintain current rates for all tenants, except apartment 3B. For that one, double the rent effective immediately. Apartment 3B, Jennifer and Richard's home, the place that had briefly been my refuge before becoming the site of my humiliation. "Consider it done," Carol said. "The notices will go out tomorrow." While waiting for the fallout, I began to rebuild myself. I rented a small but elegant apartment across town, nothing flashy, but comfortable and mine. I bought new clothes, had my hair styled professionally for the first time in years, started taking better care of myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. For what? I wasn't entirely sure. I imagined Richard's face when he opened the rent increase notice. The disbelief, the anger. Would he suspect anything? Probably not. His type never considers that their actions might come back to haunt them. I was right. A week after the notices went out, Carol called me. "We've received a rather aggressive response from the tenant in 3B, she said, amusement barely hidden in her professional tone. "He's demanding to know how the rent can legally be doubled. He's threatening to contact housing authorities." And what did the management company tell him? That the building has a new owner who's making significant improvements to the property and that the previous rent was below market value. All completely legal and true, by the way. We're already scheduling upgrades to the security system and common areas. I smiled to myself. Keep me updated. The updates came regularly over the next few weeks. Richard had tried to organize the other tenants to protest the new ownership, only to discover he was the only one facing a rent increase. He'd left increasingly hostile voicemails for the property manager. He'd even attempted to find information about the mysterious LLC that now owned the building. All the while, I watched from a distance. Twice, I drove by the building, sitting in my new car, nothing fancy, just newer and more reliable than my old one, across the street, wondering if I might catch a glimpse of Jennifer. I never did. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice was small, hesitant. My heart leaped into my throat. "Jennifer? Are you okay?" A pause, then a muffled sob. "Not really. Things are difficult right now." "What's happened? Are you hurt?" All my protective instincts surged forward. "No, nothing like that. It's just, our rent got doubled out of nowhere. Richard is going crazy trying to fight it, but nothing's working. We can't afford it, and he's taking it out on me, like it's somehow my fault." The guilt in her voice was palpable, and for a moment, I almost confessed everything. Almost. Instead, I asked, "Do you need help? I could send some money." Money that, in a roundabout way, would come right back to me as their landlord. "Richard would never accept it," she said quickly. "He'd see it as charity, his pride. You know how he is." Yes, I knew exactly how Richard was. A bully who'd thrown an elderly woman out on the street but couldn't handle a taste of his own medicine. "I've missed you, Mom," Jennifer continued, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry about what happened. I should have stood up to him. I've been a terrible daughter." "You're not terrible, Jenny," I said softly. "You're just caught in a difficult situation." We talked for almost an hour. She told me about Richard's escalating temper, how he'd become obsessed with discovering who the new building owner was, convinced it was a personal attack somehow. She admitted she'd been thinking about leaving him, but was afraid. "Where would I go?" she asked. "I don't make enough to afford a place on my own, especially not now." "You could come stay with me," I offered, surprising myself with how readily I opened that door despite everything. "You have a place? Where are you staying? Are you okay?" The questions tumbled out, and I realized she had no idea about my changed circumstances. "I'm fine," I assured her. "I found a nice apartment. It's not big, but there's room for you if you need it. No need to mention the inheritance yet. That revelation would come in its own time." As we ended the call, Jennifer promised to think about my offer. "I'll call you again soon," she said. "Richard's due home any minute. Be safe," I told her. "And Jenny, I love you. Always have, always will." "I love you too, Mom," she whispered, and then she was gone. I sat holding the silent phone for a long time afterward, tears streaming down my face. For the first time since being evicted, they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of determination. It was time to move to the next phase of my plan. Richard needed to learn that actions have consequences. But more importantly, my daughter needed to find her strength again. And I would help her, one way or another. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't remain a shadow puppet master, pulling strings from a distance. It was time to step into the light, to reclaim my power not just financially, but personally. I called Carol. "I want to schedule a meeting with all the tenants of the building," I told her. "A formal introduction of the new owner." "Are you sure that's wise?" Carol asked cautiously. "Given your personal connection to certain tenants?" "It's time," I said firmly. "But before that happens, I need to prepare." Preparation meant transformation. I spent the next 2 weeks reinventing Eleanor Thompson. I hired a personal stylist who helped me select clothes that were elegant but powerful. I visited a high-end salon where they shaped my white hair into a sleek, sophisticated style that framed my face. I even worked with a posture coach who taught me how to stand and move with confidence. "Shoulders back, chin parallel to the floor," she instructed. "You're not apologizing for taking up space anymore, Eleanor." Each morning, I practiced in front of the mirror. "I am Eleanor Thompson," I would say, looking myself directly in the eyes. "I am worthy of respect." At first, the words felt hollow, like I was play-acting someone else's life, but gradually, something shifted. The woman in the mirror started to believe it, and so did I. Meanwhile, I continued getting updates about Richard's escalating behavior. He'd tried to file complaints with the City Housing Authority, only to be informed that everything the new management company was doing was perfectly legal. He'd attempted to research the LLC that owned the building, but hit dead ends at every turn. His frustration was turning into paranoia. Jennifer called me twice more during this time. Each conversation revealed more about their deteriorating relationship. Richard had started staying out late, coming home smelling of alcohol and rage. He'd lost focus at work, becoming obsessed with the building ownership mystery. He thinks it's someone from his company, Jennifer confided. Someone who wants to drive him out because of some work rivalry. It's all he talks about anymore. I listened, offering comfort and the same open invitation for her to leave. Each time she hesitated, trapped in that terrible space between fear of the unknown and fear of staying. The day before the scheduled tenant meeting, Jennifer called in a panic. "Mom, I need to see you," she said, her voice hushed and urgent. "Can we meet somewhere? Richard's at work, but I don't have much time." We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our apartments. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize my own daughter. The vibrant woman I'd raised had diminished somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes constantly darting to the door as if expecting Richard to burst in at any moment. "Jenny," I said, reaching for her hands across the table. "What's happened?" She pulled back her sleeve slightly, revealing the edges of a bruise on her wrist. "It was an accident," she said quickly. "He grabbed me during an argument. He didn't mean to hurt me." The familiar refrain of abuse victims everywhere. My blood ran cold. "What was the argument about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady while inside I was screaming. "The rent, again. We can't afford it, and the savings are almost gone. He wanted to know if I could ask you for a loan." She laughed bitterly. "Isn't that ironic? After what he did to you, now he wants your help. And what did you tell him? That I didn't know where you were staying, which was true until recently. He didn't believe me. He thinks I've been hiding information, helping you somehow." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm scared. I don't recognize him anymore. I made a decision then and there. Come with me today. We'll go to my apartment, pack your things later when he's not home." She shook her head. "I can't just yet. There are things I need to arrange, paperwork at school." Her voice trailed off, and I recognized the excuses for what they were, the hesitation of someone not quite ready to leap. "Tomorrow then," I said firmly. "After you finish work. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered. "I should go now before he calls to check on me." As she stood to leave, I caught her arm gently. "Jennifer, there's something happening tomorrow evening, a meeting at your building with the new owner. You might want to be there." She looked confused. "Why? What does that have to do with anything?" I smiled gently. "Just trust me. Be there." After she left, I sat alone, my coffee growing cold. Tomorrow would change everything for all of us. I just hoped I was doing the right thing. The tenant meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the building's small community room. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored navy suit that Carol had helped me select. Power without flashiness, she'd called it. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup subtle but polished. I wore my mother's pearl necklace and the wedding band Frank had placed on my finger 45 years earlier. Carol was already there, arranging chairs and setting up a small refreshment table. "Are you ready for this?" she asked when she saw me. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, surveying the room. "Is everything else in place?" She nodded. "Security is posted discreetly, as requested. The documents are all prepared." She handed me a leather portfolio. "Everything you need is in here." Residents began arriving around 6:45. I stood in an adjoining office, watching through the partially open door as the room filled. Most were strangers to me, though I recognized a few faces from my brief stay in the building. They chatted among themselves, curious about this unusual gathering. At exactly 6:58, Jennifer arrived alone, looking nervous. She took a seat near the back, eyes downcast. At 7:03, Richard burst in, his tie loosened, face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. He scanned the room, spotted Jennifer, and strode over to her, whispering something harshly before taking the seat beside her. At 7:05, Carol stepped to the front of the room. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. As you know, your building was recently acquired by a new owner who has already begun making improvements to the property. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce you to that owner who wanted to meet you all personally." That was my cue. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and stepped into the room. The collective murmur that rose from the assembled tenants might have been comical under different circumstances, but I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were fixed on two people in the back row. Jennifer's jaw had literally dropped, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. Richard's expression shifted from bewilderment to recognition to horror in the span of 3 seconds. I smiled and addressed the room. "Good evening. My name is Eleanor Thompson, and I'm the new owner of this building. I look forward to making this a comfortable and secure home for all of you." As Carol began reviewing the planned improvements, security upgrades, hallway renovations, a new laundry room, I kept my posture perfect, my expression pleasant. But I was acutely aware of Richard, who had gone from pale to red to almost purple. Finally, he shot to his feet. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of sick joke?" All eyes turned to him. Carol paused mid-sentence, looking to me. "Is there a problem, Mr. Miller?" I asked calmly, using his last name as if he were a stranger. "You know damn well there's a problem," he sputtered. This is impossible. You were broke. You had nothing." The room had gone completely silent, everyone riveted by the unfolding drama. "Richard, please," Jennifer whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "Not here." He shook her off. "No, I want answers. Where did you get the money to buy this building? Who's backing you? This is harassment." I remained perfectly composed. "Mr. Miller, this is neither the time nor place for personal matters. If you have concerns about your tenancy, you're welcome to make an appointment with the management company. Personal matters? You doubled our rent, only our rent," he was shouting now, spittle flying from his lips. "You did this deliberately to punish us." An elderly woman in the front row turned to stare at him. "Your rent was doubled? Ours stayed the same." Another tenant chimed in. "Mine actually went down a little after they fixed that plumbing issue." Richard looked around wildly, realizing he was digging himself deeper. Jennifer had shrunk into her seat, mortified. "This meeting is over for you, Mr. Miller," I said firmly. "I suggest you leave before you say something you might regret." "You can't tell me to leave, you—" He caught himself before the insult fully formed, suddenly aware of his audience. "Actually, as the building owner, I can," I replied. "But I won't insist on it. Stay if you wish, but disrupt this meeting further, and there will be consequences." The word consequences hung in the air between us like a blade. Richard stood frozen for a moment, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Jennifer remained seated, her face in her hands. I continued the meeting as if nothing had happened, answering questions about the renovation timeline, discussing the new security system, promising to address individual concerns through the management company. All the while, I was hyper-aware of my daughter, still sitting in shock at the back of the room. When the meeting concluded 40 minutes later, most tenants lingered to introduce themselves personally or to enjoy the refreshments. Jennifer stayed in her seat, waiting. Finally, when the room had mostly cleared, she approached me. "Mom," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't understand. When did you—" I took her trembling hands in mine. "It's a long story, one I'd be happy to share, but right now, I'm more concerned about you. Is it time to pack your things?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, it's time." Jennifer was silent as we drove to my apartment, clutching her purse in her lap like a life preserver. The shock of the evening's revelation had left her dazed, and I didn't push for conversation. Some discoveries needed time to settle. My apartment wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant in its simplicity. Hardwood floors, tall windows, furniture chosen for comfort rather than show. As I unlocked the door and led her inside, I saw her taking it all in, trying to reconcile this new reality with what she thought she knew about my circumstances. "Sit," I said gently, gesturing to the sofa. "I'll make us some tea." When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, she had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes were still red-rimmed from crying. "So," she said, accepting the tea with shaking hands. "You're rich." I smiled slightly. "It appears so. And you bought our building." "I did. And doubled our rent, just our rent, on purpose." I met her eyes steadily. "Yes." She took a deep breath. "Why didn't you tell me? All those times we talked on the phone, you let me believe you were barely getting by. Would you have believed me if I'd told you I'd suddenly inherited millions from a grandfather you never knew existed? Over the phone, while you were still with Richard?" I asked gently. "Or would you have thought I'd lost my mind from the stress of everything?" Jennifer considered this, then sighed. "I probably wouldn't have believed it. But still, Mom, that meeting tonight, you humiliated Richard in front of everyone." "Did I?" I set my mug down carefully. I never raised my voice. I never mentioned our history. Richard humiliated himself with his outburst. But you knew he would react that way. You counted on it. I couldn't deny it. Yes, I did. Because I know what he is, Jennifer. I've known since that first night he called me a burden. Men like Richard need control more than they need love or respect. When they lose that control, they show their true selves. Jennifer's eyes welled with fresh tears. He wasn't always like this. When we first met, he was kind, charming. They often are at first, I said softly. Your father, Frank, was kind until the day he died. That's how I know the difference. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of truth settling between us. What happens now? She finally asked. That depends on you, I replied. You can stay here as long as you need, or if you prefer your own space, I can help you find something. Whatever you decide, you'll be safe and secure. And Richard? What about him? Are you going to evict us? Him? I shook my head. I'm not that petty, Jenny. He can stay as long as he pays the rent, though I suspect he won't want to once he knows who his landlord is. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Probably not. Then she looked at me curiously. How did this happen, Mom? All of it. The money, the building. You're different. So I told her everything. About finding my mother's hidden letter. About Edward Blackwell and the inheritance that had waited decades to be claimed. About the days in the cheap motel when I'd nearly given up hope. When I had nothing left but that box of Mom's things, that's when I found everything, I said. Isn't that strange? How life works sometimes? Jennifer listened, wide-eyed. When I finished my story, she shook her head in wonderment. It's like something from a movie. Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction, I replied. But here's what I've learned, Jenny. Money doesn't just buy security or comfort. It buys freedom. The freedom to make choices based on what you want, not what you're forced to accept. Like staying with a husband who calls your mother a burden, she said quietly. Exactly like that. The following morning, Jennifer and I went to her apartment to collect her essentials while Richard was at work. The building manager, now aware of the full situation, had provided a security guard to accompany us, just in case. As Jennifer packed clothes and personal items, I wandered through the apartment that had briefly been my home. It seemed smaller now, diminished somehow. In the guest room, the room I'd been evicted from, Richard had indeed set up a makeshift office with papers scattered across a folding table. Among the mess, a particular document caught my eye. It was a printout of the LLC registration that owned the building, with Richard's angry handwriting scrawled across it. Who is behind this? The irony made me smile. We finished packing what Jennifer needed immediately, promising to return for the rest later or to hire movers. As we prepared to leave, she paused in the doorway, looking back at the apartment she'd shared with Richard. I wasted 6 years of my life here, she said softly. I touched her shoulder gently. Not wasted. No experience that teaches us something is ever truly wasted. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment and healing. Jennifer filed for divorce, a process made infinitely easier by the legal team I could now afford to hire for her. Richard contested at first, then became more cooperative when my lawyers made it clear that his behavior could be exposed in court. He moved out of the apartment eventually, unable to afford the increased rent on his salary alone. I never reduced it, even after he left. Some lessons need to be reinforced. Jennifer began therapy, working through the subtle patterns of emotional abuse that had gradually isolated her from friends, family, and her own independence. Some days were harder than others, but I watched my daughter's spirit slowly reignite. As for me, I discovered that having money wasn't enough to give my life meaning. After the immediate satisfaction of my revenge plan faded, I needed something more substantial. I found it in the most unexpected way. During a meeting with my financial team, discussing investment strategies, I mentioned my background in education. Carol suggested I consider creating a foundation. You could focus on financial literacy for women, she proposed, especially those in vulnerable situations, widows, divorcees, women leaving abusive relationships. The idea resonated deeply. I knew firsthand how financial dependency could trap someone in harmful circumstances. 6 months after the tenant meeting that changed everything, I sold the apartment building. It had served its purpose, and holding on to it felt too much like clinging to the past. With part of the proceeds, I established the Sarah Thompson Foundation, named after my mother, with a mission to empower women through financial education and emergency assistance. Jennifer became the foundation's first employee, bringing her teaching skills and personal experience to the role. Watching her help other women find their strength became my greatest joy. On a crisp fall afternoon, almost a year to the day since Richard had thrown me out, Jennifer and I sat at a cafe not unlike the one where she'd first shown me her bruises. But everything else had changed. She wore her hair differently now, had gained back the weight that stress had stripped from her frame. Her eyes were clear and bright. "I got a letter from Richard's mother yesterday," she said, stirring her coffee. "She wanted to know if we might reconcile someday." "And what did you tell her?" I asked. Jennifer smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I told her that some chapters stay closed, so better ones can begin." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, you know." "I'm proud of us both," she replied. "Who would have thought we'd end up here? You, running a foundation. Me, starting over at 39. It's never too late to rewrite your story," I said. That's what I tell all the women who come through our program now. As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Jennifer looked at me curiously. "Do you ever regret it? Not the foundation or helping other women, but the way we got here, the revenge on Richard." I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that he couldn't just be decent from the start. But no, I don't regret showing him that his actions had consequences. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "You know what's funny? In his own twisted way, he did us both a favor. If he hadn't thrown you out, you might never have found Grandma's letter. And I might still be married to him, growing smaller every day. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be," I replied. As we walked out into the sunshine together, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From despair to triumph, from loss to rediscovery. I thought about my mother, keeping her secret all those years, never knowing how it would ultimately save her daughter and granddaughter. I thought about Richard, who believed that throwing an old woman out of his home was an act of strength, never realizing it would lead to his downfall. Most of all, I thought about the woman I had become. No longer just Frank's widow or Jennifer's mother, but Eleanor Thompson in my own right. A woman who had learned that it's never too late to stand tall, to claim your power, to rewrite your ending. And as Jennifer linked her arm through mine, I knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of our story were still to come. If you made it this far, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It's just 2 clicks for you, but it means so much to me. Comment what you thought of the story. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the end. See you next time.